Well, Facebook has refriended Australia, and Australian news will be restored to the Facebook platform.
Facebook has ended its unprecedented week-long blackout in Australia after tweaks to a new legislation that will require tech giants to pay for news content. Last week, the company blocked its Australian users from viewing news. The case has drawn widespread attention internationally, including in Canada. Officials say Facebook is now seeking to reach agreements to pay for content. So what does the deal mean for countries like Canada, who have vowed to impose their own regulations against Facebook? Joining me now is Daniel Bernhard. He's the Executive Director of Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, an advocacy group that operates in the field of broadcasting journalism and big tech. He's in Toronto tonight. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So first, tell us, is this a win for Facebook or is this a win for Australian media?
Well, right now, I think it's a win for Australian democracy, that the will of the people and the will of the legislature will prevail. Facebook has acknowledged that they can be legally obligated to pay for news, and they have come back to the table. Now, it remains to be seen whether Facebook's spin or the Australian government's spin is to be believed here. I imagine that the details will be very fine and will hang on the interpretations of very specific words. But it's clear that Facebook will be paying for news on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's a good thing for publishers, it's a good thing for creators, it's a good thing for the public broadcaster, who is also included in the code, and it's a good thing for democracy.
So we expect, other countries are watching this and will potentially follow suit. They'll be looking closely at some of those details. But I want to understand, what do you think it actually means about the future of journalism and access to news in this digital age?
Well, journalism for a long time has been largely ad-supported, and what's happened now is that two companies called Google and Facebook take between them over 80% of the advertising revenues from journalists, and they produce no journalism in exchange. So the number one source of news produces no news, and the people who produce the news don't get paid. And so we've seen hundreds of layoffs, including several hundred at Bell Media in the last couple of months, that are affecting communities right across Canada who will no longer have a paper, who will no longer have a local radio station or broadcaster to speak about what's going on where they live. Having these platforms pay to at least restore some of the system that they destroyed, a system that is so vital to the functioning of a healthy democracy, is essential. And I'm glad that the Australians have stuck with this and that they will be plowing forward. And now it falls on countries like Canada to prove that we also have the resolve to follow through.
So part of this deal allows Facebook, though, to choose which publications they'll pay and whose content will be promoted. So I want to get your reaction to that. Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, my understanding is that that's not the case, although I can see how some of the changes that were introduced at the last minute do call that into question. So the code, the mandatory bargaining code that the Australians are proposing, has an all or nothing clause. If the code is applied, you either strike deals with all the publishers and broadcasters, or you can't use content from any of them. Now, there is some question at the moment as to whether or not Facebook will have a little bit more discretion in the future, but from what I've seen so far, what I can tell you for certain is the Australian government has made some very minor cosmetic changes, like adding a delay period, for example, to make a little bit more time for Facebook to reach these deals. But it is not clear to me that Facebook will be allowed to divide and conquer. If that is in fact the case, however, it would vastly, greatly undermine the efficacy of this whole exercise. And so, again, we're hanging on the words of the spin doctors here. And Facebook would spin it that way because that is in their favor. Facebook has a dicey relationship with the truth. And so my first inclination would not be to give them the benefit of the doubt, but we'll have to see. If that is in fact the case, it would be a problem.
Okay, we'll keep watching that one. In recent years, we have seen growing calls for Facebook to regulate the spread of misinformation, fake news, propaganda. How does that kind of come into play in light of this new legislation?
Well, I think it's funny. Facebook has said over and over again how much they care about fighting misinformation, how sincerely they are enjoined in this battle to clean up their platform. And yet, given the chance to actually pay the people who produce the good content on their platform, they planted their flag squarely on the side of the anti-vaxxers and the anti-maskers. They ceded the platform to them, and they declared for a week that if your content is legitimate, verified, trustworthy journalism, it's not allowed on Facebook. I think that was very telling about Facebook's many statements to parliaments and to journalists. I think their sincerity should now be called into question. And this move just shows that they have no compunction about handing over all the keys to the kingdom to the worst aspects of their platform because they think it will make them more money. And I think that was a revealing aspect of this exchange.
All right, Daniel Bernhard, he is the Executive Director of Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, an advocacy group, and he is in Toronto tonight. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Ginella.